So tonight I'm going to share a little bit about our reopening progress, as well as some survey data that we took, and then some of our next steps as we navigate the uncharted waters of reopening schools. Slide. So first I want to kind of talk about our timeline and where we've been and where we're headed. So on September 3rd, schools reopened in emergency school closures. So why was this? Well, the Department of Health in Los Angeles County ordered all schools in the area closed to begin the school year. And so what we did is we began every student on what we called the emergency school closure schedule. And we did not split students in a hybrid learning schedule and a 100% full distance learning schedule, recognizing that we are such a small school district, and one has just to recognize that like the smaller the school district, the more difficult it is to run multiple models of instruction, and that has to do with staffing. It's just much more difficult to build cohorts of students when you're effectively just one school. So case in point, in a larger school district, you could take multiple middle schools, or multiple high schools or multiple elementary schools, and build distance learning cohorts and build, and then have the rest of the students attend hybrid. Whereas for us, we don't have that ability. And so running, 100% full distance learning model alongside a hybrid model, and that is currently operating in emergency school closures, just didn't make sense for us as a school district. And other small school districts took a similar approach. We learned later in their reopening, just opening across the board where everyone is on the same schedule. Then what happened is that the LA Department of Health started to release guidance allowing for some limited reopening, so long as all the Department of Health guideline protocols were followed. So they allowed for first in-person special education assessments. Myself and other special education directors in the area had advocated to be able to provide special education assessments. We were backlogged with them and recognized that it was highly necessary. And when the Department of Health allowed us to do so, beginning on September 14th, our special education stakeholders and staff began providing in-person assessments. Then the County Department of Health released guidance in late September allowing for small cohorts of high need students to be present on campus. And so following along that same line, we prioritize our special day class. And while we had some staffing that we needed to fill in order to meet the needs of that class, we were able to do so, and then we successfully opened our special day class. So that's our students with moderate to severe disabilities, and they are currently on campus now. I was there today at Valley and got to see the classroom in action, and thank you to that team for that reopening. Then on October 9th, the LA Department of Health came down and visited. So President Cole brought up the idea of ignoring the Department of Health guidance or mandates, which has been brought up to me before. And I just want to share that the Department of Health has made very, very clear, particularly to public organizations, that they must follow the mandates. And we're not alone on this. Every school, public school in the LA County is, and in the state for that matter, is under the same guidance, and they're guided by their local health department. So they sent a health inspector down to visit our campuses and evaluate the in-person services and assessments and SDC class that we were providing. And we were cleared. There was no concerns listed, and very proud of our Valley and View staff, for that matter, for providing safe assessments and services to our students. And then on October 12th, we began in-person OT services, thanks to Chris Soria, our occupational therapist. And then looking ahead, next we're looking to provide high need or for mild to moderate students with disability. We're also looking at students with social emotional needs for counseling. And then we had some staffing that we needed to do in regard to leave. So we're also looking at providing speech services shortly as well. And I'll talk about that a little bit later in our timeline. What I'd like to share in this timeline, though, is that while our campuses are not reopened to all students, we have been in the process of progressively reopening really since September. Each time the Department of Health is allowed for partial or targeted reopening, we have been working with our labor union and with our staff in order to try to do what we can to prioritize and meet the needs of the students that we are allowed or able to serve. And we'll continue to do so through October. Slide. So on October 5th, the Board of Supervisors voted to reinstate the waiver process for TK2. This process was suspended by the LA Department of Health due to the rising number of cases of COVID. However, the Board of Supervisors vote reinstated that process, and I'm going to share a little bit about what goes into that. So here are some aspects of it that I think are important to note. One is, as of now, that there have not been any approvals for the waiver process, that the waivers are still processing. And there is a substantial review process that takes, as we've been told, about 2 to 3 weeks for an application to be processed. The LA County will only allow for 30 schools to be approved each week, max. So in all of Los Angeles County, they will only allow 30 elementary schools at a time to be approved for TK2. And it is by supervisorial district. So in our supervisorial district, which extends all the way to Diamond Bar, and then all the way to the northern part of the South Bay or coastal area, that's 6 schools per approval, so per week. This is based on, so as they prioritize it, it'll be based on free and reduced lunch. So a school that applies that is granted approval that has the highest number of free and reduced lunch students will be prioritized for approval. This is not a first come, first served basis either. So you could apply on day 1 and if the following week schools apply that have a higher number of free and reduced lunch, then they will be approved before those schools, regardless of when any school applied. So it is rolling that as the applications come in, that like your application can continue to drop based off your free and reduced lunch status. And just to share, we have one of the lowest free and reduced lunch populations in the state. That's why you kind of hear the HBF talk about that we're the 5th lowest funded school district in the state. The reason for that is the low amount of our free and reduced lunch population in our school district. So that's just in the state. That is in the county. And they also reinstated letters of approval. So you must have a letter of support agreeing to reopen under the waiver process from your labor union, which for us, that would be Hermosa Beach Educators Association, which represents both classified and certificated, and then a letter of support from parent organizations, and then the city as well too. So that is what goes into the waiver process, and just to note, in our local area, as I understand that Manhattan Beach is considering applying for the waiver process. I believe that their board desires to do so, but they are awaiting whether or not their labor union is going to write a letter of support. And then in Redondo Beach at this time, they are not applying for a waiver. And I am unaware of the status of others, but I'm not, as of right now, I am not aware of another school district in the South Bay that has stated that they have applied for a waiver. And then So next, arises the question, just as far as LA Department of Health updates. I mean, like on that note, well, where are we in regard to the data? So where we're at is we're currently still existing in the purple tier, and that's based off of our case rate, which is +7. And the way the rules of the game are played here is that it requires you have to be 2 weeks below the purple tier, or in our case, it would be below a positive case rate of 7. And then you have to remain in that tier for another 2 weeks. So arguably, I mean, like at any given time, we're 2 to 4 weeks out from a potential reopening based off of falling numbers. Slide, Michelle. So this is the tier system: purple, red, orange, and yellow. The red tier is the reopening tier. So under this guidance, the LA Department of Health would have the ability to allow schools to reopen. With that said, and nothing's certain, but local superintendents and educators have kind of gotten the sense that the LA Department of Health is contemplating a phased reopening. They have not said this officially. However, I mean, like they have, I would say, telegraphed their punches, kind of indicating that there would be a potential that when we fell into the red tier, that the first phase would be reopening for TK2, like the waiver. And then in turn, they would look to phase in upper grades based off of the numbers that they were seeing in LA County. Their reasoning for this level of caution beyond the state is twofold. One is, so each Department of Health cannot be less restrictive than the California Department of Health guidance. So what you're looking at here, this is the California Department of Health guidance. These are the numbers in alignment with Governor Newsom. However, the LA Department of Health can choose to be more restrictive than the California Department of Health's guidance. Every time the California Department of Health has put out guidance, the LA Department of Health has proved to be typically more restrictive. So it would not be a surprise that with a potential reopening, or within the next somewhere between 2 to 4 weeks, if the data continues to trend downward, that a reopening would be limited to TK2 or elementary level. Again, not official, but that's what's been messaged. I also think it's just important to note too that the data is always 2 weeks old, that is being processed and reviewed for this tier. And what they were looking at was there was an expectation that there was going to be a large Labor Day spike. And while there was a bump, it wasn't a dramatic spike. In fact, we fell into the red tier about a week and a half ago based off of our positive case rate numbers. And overall, the numbers in LA County continue to trend downward. Now, it really is week to week as far as these updates go. But based off of what the Department of Health has shared with us on the declining numbers, there is a probable chance, or what they said, a good chance, you can read into that as you will, that we could potentially be in the red tier within November, based off the falling case rates. So November is about 2 to 3 weeks away. And that is the window by which it'll probably become very clear if the positive case rates are putting us into reopening territory. Slide. So I want to revisit our on-campus progress and just talk students. What you see is that's Miss Just right there in our special day classroom, and you can see some of the health protocols in place. And we've in this classroom we've put up temporary dividers and taken all the precautions required under the LA Department of Health to support our students and staff with their health and safety. As I mentioned, we did have a health inspection, and we were 100% cleared as providing a safe environment for our students. But make no mistake, the LA Department of Health makes you cross all your T's and dot all your I's for all of these protocols, and they definitely mean business about it, as we saw. whether you're reopening under the red tier or you're applying for a waiver, you must demonstrate that you are following all the health protocols, and they will not allow you to reopen if you are not able to follow inspection, if you're not able to meet all of those guidelines in place. So for the on-campus progress, we've had 22 students have participated in special education assessments, and as well as our English language proficiency assessment, known as the LPAC, for our English language learner students. We've had 14 staff members participate in assessments. And then currently right now we have 7 students that are participating in our special day program, and we have 6 staff that are participating in our special day program. And then I think we have approximately, it started on Monday, but I think we're gonna have approximately 15 students that will be participating in OT services. And then we look to expand that with speech near the end of the month. Slide. So next I'm gonna present to the board our reopening survey data. So when we met with our reopening committee, which we have another meeting tomorrow, actually, where I'll share the same data. After speaking with the reopening advisory committee, because of the falling numbers in our county and the a probable likelihood that Los Angeles County could enter the red tier or the reopening tier in November, it was recommended that we take a survey just to account for readiness. And part of that is in preparation to what would be to split, like our student population. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we began the year with all students in emergency school closures. And again, to go back to that, that was a logistical decision based upon the size of our school district and the logistics of running 2 models, particularly if you're all in distance learning. So to pivot towards a reopening, we would have to assess which families would opt for hybrid and which families would opt for 100% distance learning. It was also recommended by our committee that we assess how many families wanted to remain in emergency school closures until the end of the trimester. This consideration was based upon, as we talked about, the logistics of splitting the cohorts and disrupting the continuity of education currently in distance learning within the trimester mark. So that was the purpose of asking that question and the reasoning behind including emergency school closures as an option until the end of the trimester. So the survey began for staff and for parents on Monday, October 5th, and then we took a snapshot of that data on Monday, October 12th. We had, by that time, 71 staff members participate, and then we had 991 parents per student participate. So we asked parents to complete the survey multiple times if they had multiple children, just to really account for hard numbers, because sometimes too, what we found was the option for a parent might vary based upon the age of their child. Slide. So on the survey data, this first survey question simply just asked, like the grade level of their child. So this will give you a sense of those 991 parents who participated on behalf of their child, how they're represented within this data. Thank you. Slide, Michelle. Next is the question of, if I were asked today to make my trimester-based selection for my child for the remainder of the first trimester, September to December 2020, I would choose the following. And again, in our original plan during the summer, we've always stated that we would ask parents to make a trimester-long commitment, either to hybrid learning or to distance learning. And in this case, what was included was emergency school closures. So as you see in this snapshot, 9.9% of our families chose to, would opt to go into 100% full distance learning. This is a full-time distance learning where a teacher is teaching as a distance learning teacher only. And it would involve asynchronous learning and really synchronous support and instruction from the teacher. More than likely based upon the numbers of students that participate in 100% full distance learning, that teacher would likely be supporting multiple grade levels, or what sometimes are called a combo class. And it would involve asynchronous work and support from the teacher. And I strongly encourage families to go and look at the reopening plans document to get a look at the specifics of that schedule. You can also review our town hall where we walk through each individual schedule with our staff for a more thorough review as well. Next is emergency school closures with 21.7%. So these were families that may also be hybrid families, may also be 100% full distance learning families, but their choice was just to remain in emergency school closures for the remainder of the trimester. However, if we were to reopen during the trimester, we could not continue with emergency school closures. The schedule really is based upon what we're currently operating now, where it's across the board, everyone's participating. And emergency school closures would occur again if families were participating in hybrid learning and then schools had to suddenly close again. So then those families that were participating in hybrid learning, they would go back into emergency school closures. Everyone knows what emergency school closures is now because they're currently participating in the schedule. So I think that our families have a pretty good sense of what that looks like at this point in time. And then lastly is hybrid learning. This was the majority. This is consistent with the data that we took during the course of the summer. That roughly means somewhere between 70 to 75% of our families have indicated that their preference would be to return to school. This also included a desire to return to school fully. And I just want to again clarify that a full return of 5-day, full day instruction, will not be allowed under the LA Department of Health guidelines. If you'd like an opportunity to review the schedule more thoroughly, I recommend looking at the reopening plan that's listed on our website, also on the survey letter. And then also on our website under COVID-19 updates, you can also watch the recorded town hall and board meeting for a review of those schedules by the administrative team to kind of listen to about what those schedules look like in depth. I know it's been a while since that presentation. Slide, Michelle. So we next asked parents just about what was their primary reasons for this selection, and we kind of just limited to these general areas that we thought were the highest rated in our last survey. So 63% of parents said it was based upon a personal preference. 463 or 46% said it was based on student choice. 28.2% on health concerns, 15% childcare needs, and then there was also an other, which represented 3.1%. The highest number reported reason in other was socialization for those 31 respondents. Slide. We asked our parents, as of now, are they currently without childcare? This has been a sensitive issue to us. These numbers have evolved from summer to until now. And what we have is 63% say currently they are not without childcare. 18% say that yes, but they have a plan to address it. And 18% say yes, and they are without a plan to address it. And I do think this number could possibly be deceiving as well too, because many families have had to make sacrifices or make adjustments either with their career or with their loved ones or relatives or friends in order to figure out something for their childcare. So though people may be saying no, it does not. That does not mean that it's the optimal choice. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that the vast majority of our community would prefer their childcare to be provided by the school. Slide. So we also asked for open-ended comments, just feedback in regard to distance learning. So emergency school closures as current. Hybrid, and then 100% full distance learning. So we had substantially over 600 comments, and what we did is that we just took the most repeated or highest themed comments and also listed them in order here too. So at the top is the most common comment. At the bottom would be the definitely one of the more common comments, but less so than the top comment. So it really is in priority order based upon our review of the data. So number one, schools should open under hybrid or 5 days per week for full days or full reopening. So that was the most repeated comment in the comment section, was just a desire for schools to reopen. Next, a request to remain on emergency school closures until the end of trimester. So that would be representative of that 21% who expressed that until the end of the trimester that you would remain in emergency school closures. I don't think that this means either this population is saying that they want to remain in distance learning. I think that they could be split in that regard, but it's just, again, a desire to remain on the current path. And then next is concern that current distance learning model is causing social, emotional, and academic harm. So this goes back to the desire for the reopening of schools, and that how we're currently operating in emergency school closures is causing social, emotional harm and academic harm to students. Next is concerns about schools' PLP functionality. There was some comments about rigor as well too, but the functionality and usability of the system. Next is reduce the amount of screen time and or Zoom time for younger students. So concern just about the amount of screen time that younger students are participating on in front of a screen. Next is a desire for safety measures in place during hybrid learning. So in the event that we were in hybrid learning, a desire to ensure that we were meeting all the health requirements in place by the I don't know if necessarily by the LA Department of Health, but just that safety would be the #1 priority. Next, and almost as equally so within the comments, was a resistance to the safety measures in place during hybrid learning. So that would be like primarily masks and social distancing. So just to explain, the desire to not have their child wear a mask, or in regard to social distancing, that social distancing should not be in place so that schools can fully reopen. And then next is that schools should not reopen to reduce the spread of COVID-19. So a concern that to reopen schools may increase the spread of COVID-19 in Hermosa Beach community specifically. And then next and finally is concern about 100% full distance learning model versus the hybrid learning model. So to explain that, there is concern that those that would opt for 100% full distance learning would not have the same experience that they would be having under emergency school closures, and that they would not be having the same experience as those participating in the hybrid learning model, which is accurate. That 100% full distance learning, because of the split of our staff, would be a different model in regard to the numbers that we're looking at and the staffing that's provided. And again, to explain that this is purely a logistics issue. I mean, like schools are designed really to function in one way, which is full opening. But under the 2 model program, while it is possible, it's exacerbated by our size. I know that there's some, and I've talked to many parents that believe because we're a small school district that it's easier for us to pivot back and forth between the models. I would share that I don't find that to be the case. We're actually a member of a small school districts association, so I've been talking with other small school districts in California that are dealing with the same issue, and the conclusion is that it's actually more difficult, and it's because you cannot cohort students across multiple schools to build a full distance learning option. And even in schools that are of moderate size are looking at having multi-grade level full distance learning cohorts, because of just the difference in numbers that range somewhere between 60-40 to 80-20 in regard to those that are opting for hybrid learning versus those that are opting for distance learning only. And again, splitting our staff under just the numbers don't measure out well. And what does that mean, Jason? It's like, well, we have classroom cohorts, right? That it's a 24-to-1 ratio. Typically at the higher grades 30-to-1. And that you really don't have enough students per teacher to meet that ratio to make sense to hire teachers. Like, why not just hire more teachers? And the truth is, we don't have the budget to afford effectively doubling our staff. That if you were to hire or have a full distance learning teacher per every grade level, or at secondary per every class, we would be operating well outside of our budget, not even near our budget, because again, we'd be effectively doubling our workforce. So it is a logistical consideration that we just would not have the number of students necessary to build complete classes in that sense. So we'd have to be creative about our full distance learning schedule. Next, I'm going to, slide, Michelle. Next, I'm going to move into our staff survey. So staff were also surveyed, and the survey was, again, very similar to the survey that was performed during the summer about reopening readiness. So the first question is, once we receive guidance from local health authorities that it is safe to return to school with cautionary measures in place, that's the LA Department of Health guidelines, what is your confidence returning to in-person instruction? So 12% of our staff stated that no, they do not feel safe returning to school. 33% stated that they would confidently return, and 53% stated that they would return, but they do have concerns in doing so. Slide. So if they indicated no to the question above, do they intend to request a medical leave? And 98% said this was not applicable, and less than a percentage, or 1% stated that they would plan to request a leave. Slide. So on the staff survey, if given an opportunity to be a 100% distance learning teacher for families who choose to participate in distance learning only, would you apply? And it's about split 50-50, that 50% said yes and 50% said no. And just to clarify here, based even off these preliminary numbers, we would not have enough 100% full distance learning positions to accommodate this level of interest. That based off these numbers, the 100% full distance learning staffing would be much smaller than this expressed interest. But it goes straight to that we have plenty of staff that would be interested in doing so. Next slide. So we surveyed staff on just what are their, for those that have concerns, what are the concerns about returning to the work location when school reopens? So this kind of gives you a sense of what, especially for those that said that they would return, but they have concerns, gives you a sense of some of the things that would need to be addressed to support those concerns. So 71% said catching or spreading the coronavirus. 52% said health concerns for myself and my family. 55% said not being able to social distance at school. 46% said schools closing again. 40% said school cleanliness. 35% class size. 32% not having appropriate protective gear. 16% childcare needs. 10% having a different bell schedule. 10% students not prepared due to learning loss, and then 1.5% other. Which what I found was like most of the other reasons stated were somehow interrelated to the ones above. Slide. So kind of, again, further exploring concerns of staff about safety. In accordance with the mandates of the LA Department of Health, select the safety measures you feel are most important. So 78% said being contacted if a student, teacher, or staff is confirmed positive with COVID-19. 73% said require all students, teachers, and staff to wear masks. 66% said no volunteers or visitors on campus. 59% said social distancing in classrooms. 57% said improved cleaning before and after school. 57% stated health screening checks prior to student entry. 54% stated sufficient personal protective equipment. And then 1.4% said other, and the most common answer was none of the above. Slide. And then we assessed if you return to school campus, are you currently without childcare? So 73% said no. 14% said yes, and they are without a plan to address it, and 11% said yes, but they have a plan to address it. And I think the same thing applies here, that I think even with the nose, like I said, like you could probably dig deeper into, I mean, like what really is like that system of support. I mean, like, and how would that translate into a reopening? Slide. So on the staff survey, we asked the same question in regard to feedback about hybrid, distance learning, and/or emergency school closures. We had about 30 respondents on the staff survey for comments. So, and again, this is the same in order of most frequent to less frequent, and again, all were themed out. A little less so because there was only 30 responses in this case. That's because our staff is much smaller than our parent survey. So one was consideration for an AM/PM hybrid model. Next was health safety concerns related to catching or spreading COVID-19. So there's a lot of just various concerns that kind of boiled down to just concern about safety and about the illness itself. Next was difficulty of implementing the LA Department of Health protocols, social distancing, masks, etc. So concern about, like, you know, getting students to comply. You mean like, you know, students complying with it on campus or possibly coming to school sick. So that kind of was the theme of those concerns. Next was the logistics of redistributing classes in order to split between the hybrid and distance learning. So that, as I mentioned before, just like those logistics of separating those classes, it is an inevitability, at this point in the year when we reopen. But the logistics of doing so primarily at the trimester, within the trimester being the concern. Next was challenges of continuity of learning when changing models. This kind of like links, I think, with the above comment, just the challenge of the disruption of emergency school closures model, you mean like during the trimester. Next was concern that the district will continue to implement mandates which make teaching difficult and time consuming. There are district mandates, and policies right now that I do think are very taxing for our teachers and for their time. Next is concern about maintaining hybrid learning and distance learning at the same time. And so I think that's just a general concern about just the challenge of hybrid and distance learning. And so to explain, when you're doing hybrid learning, because of social distancing measures by the LA Department of Health, only 50% of the campus students can be on campus at any given time, and you have to maintain 6 feet social distancing within a classroom, which effectively boils down to 50%. So the concern about trying to balance being a hybrid teacher in person while also trying to be a distance learning teacher and account for those students that are participating in asynchronous instruction or work while they're not at school. And then questions related to the cold and flu season and the potential of closures in the winter. Slide, Michelle. So what are our next steps currently as a district? So right now we're, each week we monitor the LA Department of Health reports and reopening data to prepare for a potential campus reopening. So from, my perspective and the information that's been shared with us from the LA Department of Health, as of now, LA County continues to trend downward. There was a slight bump in the data based off of earlier September and perhaps Labor Day weekend, but it was nowhere near the spike that I think that the Department of Health themselves had predicted there would be. And the data continues to trend downward. A week ago, LA County entered the red tier criteria because the positivity rate fell below 7. And the Department of Health has shared that there is a strong potential that we can fall into the red tier, over the course of the next 2 to 4 weeks, making us a potential reopening in some shape or form to occur in November. So that's, not guaranteed, but that is what has been shared with us as their indications. And as I mentioned before, though again, not official, it does seem like the LA Department of Health will take some type of phase reopening, and I do not believe that it'll be a complete reopening based off of what they're sort of telegraphing to us in their messaging. And I think you can kind of see that even the waiver process being centered around TK2. So we are going to continue to expand our in-person offerings to high-need students. So our next steps, we're looking at supporting our students with mild to moderate disabilities. Supporting those students through our RSP program. So that's what we're next looking to do, as well as our speech. We had some staffing to fill some leave of absence positions. So that's our next step is we've staffed those, and we're looking to also expand speech. And then we're also looking at the possibility of providing in-person counseling for students with high social emotional needs. Sorry, I'm looking at Maggie's cute kid. Next, what we would do is we would to do so, we have been and we continue to meet and work with our HBCSD staff. I mean, starting with our special education team, we have worked with them and they have been awesome. They've got us to assessments. We've been able to provide STC. We're providing OT services, and then next looking to try to expand out and broaden that to other high need students. And we're taking this phased approach to reopening. So I do feel that we're in the process of reopening in a methodical way. This is very similar to Redondo Beach Unified School District's approach. And they have taken similar measures to methodically reopen for their highest need students, and have done so safely and successfully as well. And so next though, you mean like if there is a potential for us to enter the red tier and for a potential reopening in November, really we are beginning to focus like our preparation and our planning around a TK2 potential reopening. Not guaranteed, but it does seem like that if there's going to be reopening, it at the very least will occur within those grade spans, and because the LA Department of Health seems to be taking this phased approach. So in order to do so, what we would need to do is, if it became more clear with the data going into late October that LA County Department of Health numbers were falling below into the red tier and that reopening was becoming more imminent, we would need to finalize our hybrid and 100% full distance learning student pathways. So we would be asking for parents to commit for this trimester to either hybrid or 100% full distance learning. And then we need to staff 100% full distance learning. And then we'd also need to adjust for potential medical leave openings. So what could occur, upon a reopening, and we've seen this in other school districts or in other counties that have reopened, is that you could have staff members that will take potential medical leave because of fear of returning because of the disease, or because they have a medical condition or a loved one has a medical condition in their household that they would make necessary a medical leave. So we'd have to fill those positions as well too to make that pivot. Slide. So these are just some of the considerations before the board and the school district in regard to a potential reopening, whether that came like via waiver or whether that came via us entering the red tier in November for a phased approach to reopening. And one I mentioned, and I think this is the biggest, is that we're a small school district and we have a multi-model challenge. I know that that is hard to hear, but it really is the reality of being a small school district, that this does not make it more advantageous for us. It makes it a disadvantage. And if you look at the schedules and our reopening plan and consider the staffing behind that, it becomes clear that a pivot for us is very possible. It's just going to be a full pivot. And there was a reason why we started out under emergency school closures across the board in order to address this challenge, and we weren't alone in other small school districts that took a similar approach. Another is the continuity of emergency school closures. I do think that we have found our fitting. Granted, we know that we want to be in school, but I think our staff and our students have just adjusted to emergency school closures. So a pivot will disrupt that, and we'll be relearning again. It's inevitable. We will go back to school on campus. That will happen. So we will have to deal with this at some point. The question is a matter of when. Next is the entering of the cold and flu season effect. So just something to share here, and this is more in regard to the LA Department of Health guidelines, and something to consider. That I don't really view this from this perspective of whether there's going to be a COVID surge or not. It seems like if you look at LA County's data, that our data continues to trend downward. However, though, entering cold and flu season does run the risk of just that, cold and flu. So under the LA Department of Health guidance, if someone is exhibiting symptoms that are either cold or flu, like they must quarantine. And depending on school operations, or depending on the spread of that, like others will be quarantined. So if your child, is sick with any of these symptoms, they will be out of school, participating in distance learning. So if we have a cold and flu season anywhere near like the cold and flu season that we had last year, and as an elementary principal, I experienced that firsthand, where we in some cases had half of classes out. It could be very disruptive, not because of COVID, but just because the Department of Health guidelines makes very clear that anyone that's showing these types of symptoms cannot be at school. And you can't be at school for a period of time as well too. You must quarantine. So this could also have impact entering a cold and flu season for the potential reopening of schools. Next is consideration of a waiver versus the red tier. Is it best to apply for a waiver and hope that we are selected for that waiver, and get agreement from our labor union, or by the time that we are actually receive a waiver, that LA County has already entered the red tier and that we are preparing for a potential reopening. So to go down that road, is it worth it if this is going to be determined within 2 to 3 weeks, regardless? And then next is the trimester timeline, which you can see there. And so this is again based off our survey data and just consideration of how deep into the trimester should we go? In consideration of a pivot, whether by waiver or by entering the red tier for a reopening of schools. And they're all, very, I would say, important considerations in regard to maneuvering our small school district. So, reopening is an inevitability, and I do believe that our school district has taken more steps than most to reopen schools, and we are continuing to reopen schools in I would say a methodical way, and to do so safely. And I do believe that if LA Department of Health takes a phased approach, we'll continue right on that path of a phased reopening, with implementing the guidance of the LA Department of Health as we have to. But I would say that again, it is important to note that we have been in the process of reopening since the get-go, really, and we intend to continue to do so over the rest of October, and also continue to monitor the development of if we can reopen in some capacity at the elementary level going into November, which is looking increasingly likely to do so. So that is some of the realities of potential reopening considerations.